Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 news. Carlos Sainz wins the Australian Grand Prix with a lap 4 retirement from Max Verstappen for the first time since way back in Australia 2022. But massive drama right to the death of the Grand Prix, with George Russell again crashing out on a race that Verstappen has a hard time, and Carlos Sainz wins in a battle with Fernando Alonso right down to the wire on turn 6. Alonso has now been penalised a 20-second penalty for effectively brake testing and dangerous driving up against George Russell. Russell says absolutely, of course, the correct decision. Alonso disagrees. What do you guys think in the comment section below? Much drama on this today. Very much intrigued to your thoughts down there. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. I would greatly appreciate it. So I woke up this morning and I thought, you know what? I'll wake up at like 5:15. I'm not going to watch the start of the Grand Prix. I was up late last night until 2. I watched the Formula 2 race. And actually there's something to say on Formula 2 in a second, because the way that Russell crashed was very reminiscent of the way that Hauger crashed in the Formula 2 race. I think there's definitely something to be said on the safety right now of the way that turn 6 is designed. But I thought, you know what? Max is probably going to win. I'll wake up at 5:15 and I'll just see how it's getting on. And I was, obviously just woken up. I was looking at the stream and I was like, that doesn't say Verstappen in P1. I think that says Carlos Sainz. I was looking down, where's Max? Where's Max? Top 3, top 2 or something. But no, Verstappen was out of the race. And then Hamilton was out of the race as well. I thought, oh my God, it's 2021 all over again, right? They've somehow crashed into each other or something. But that wasn't the case, but it was still highly dramatic. So the race got underway and it was quite clear from the off that Verstappen didn't quite have the pace that I was expecting, even I think from like turn 4 of the first lap. When I watched the highlights back, I was expecting Max to go into turn 1 and then have disappeared off into the distance. That didn't happen though, and Carlos Sainz gets past Max into turn 9 on the next lap, and all of a sudden it's absolutely race on. It then became very clear afterwards that Verstappen had an issue with his car. His right rear tyre was smoking to hell, his brake was absolutely fried, and this is an issue that got worse and worse until he was forced to come into the pits and retire. So unbelievable scenes, right? The Red Bull has been incredibly reliable. Max is on a 9-race winning spree going back to last year, and the race that comes to an end is Australia. I don't know what it is about Australia that does this. It's always a race of attrition. There's always like red flag or safety cars or just incidents in general here, and it's not an especially dangerous circuit for instance like this, but for whatever reason the conditions just make it absolutely rife with incidents such as this, and it affects Max Verstappen. He of course retired here in 2022 when Charles Leclerc secured the Grand Chelem that weekend and was leading the championship by quite some way. Leclerc would have been leading the championship today had he won the Grand Prix, but he didn't, and we'll discuss the winner here in a second. So a retirement for Verstappen, the first one in a very long period of time. Of course, immediately he was very frustrated, right? How could the team allow this to happen? The tyre was absolutely cooked as well. I mean, it was literally getting cooked, by the way. This is it smoking minutes, probably minutes to be fair, not hours, after the race was over for Verstappen while the race was going on for the rest of the guys. So yeah, remarkable incident really here to start the Grand Prix. Have a right brake effectively seizing up, really. I think it got worse and worse over the first few laps, to which point the tyre was getting cooked and it was all over. This I thought was probably my favourite tweet of the day really here from Alpine, because they've had a tough start to the season, and if Ocon didn't get like a tear off stuck in his brake duct, maybe he could have even scored points today. But yeah, as they say, double overtake on Verstappen as of course Verstappen comes into the pits. Max afterwards wasn't too frustrated about this whole circumstance, I think mainly because he goes to Suzuka next weekend, and we know what tends to happen there. He lost in Singapore last year, he went to Suzuka, and he put on an absolute masterclass. That Red Bull will be a rocket ship around that circuit with the way that it's designed, as it has been the last couple of seasons. Max is probably going to try and lap the entire field in Suzuka, I imagine. That's going to be his plan, but as he says, at the start of the race, the right rear brake was just stuck on. It was like driving with a handbrake on. I guess it got worse and worse. They could see it in the data at the start that the right side was stopping cooling down, and look, it's a mechanical sport, things like this can happen. It's a shame because we had a chance to win. He doesn't say that it won for sure, and that's one of the other big questions of today. Would Max Verstappen have won this race had he not had this mechanical issue? That is a difficult question to answer. Sergio Perez has a rather emphatic answer for this, but of course he may have his own agenda on the matter. So the race continues, and then Lewis Hamilton has a massive engine failure, and it's just like, it's remarkable, isn't it? Like, Mercedes typically are so reliable, and this year they've made a terrible car, and it's it's slow. I mean, maybe not terrible compared to some of the other cars on the grid. It's still a point scorer, but it's terrible for Mercedes standards. Like, everybody knows this, especially around a circuit like this, it seems, despite having had a great success here over the last 10 years. The engine blows up, just like it did for Russell last year. He had an engine failure here last year, but last year Hamilton got second while Russell DNF'd. This year, Russell DNF'd while Hamilton DNF'd. So, yeah, the engine just exploded. I mean, it just, like, absolutely died immediately. It wasn't even like it was a slow burn. It was on, and then it was just dead. So Hamilton pulls over after turn 10, gets it into a nice safe position, and the race continues. It also, of course, has to be mentioned that this Grand Prix, I mean, okay, I only watched the last, 10 minutes of the Grand Prix, but as soon as I looked at the deltas, I was like, this race has been pretty dull, hasn't it? Because I could see by the deltas that there wasn't really much battling going on, and it was pretty much Noah's Ark 2x2 for a lot of the teams all the way down the field. Of course, it gave opportunities with the Verstappen, the Hamilton DNFs to other drivers to actually score some points here, which is the fun thing when there are mechanical retirements or just retirements for various other reasons. But it's not like this was a great race. And I think it shows that the dominance of Verstappen and the fact that he has won every Grand Prix in a very long period of time now is not, it's one reason why the sport is boring at times, but because, if you know who's going to win, then sure, obviously it's not as entertaining, but it's far from the only reason. And we talked about this the other day, the problems with the cars, the problems with the tyres. They're too fat. Okay, maybe fat's a bit unfair on these cars, but they're too big, they're too wide, they're too long, they're too heavy. They generate so much dirty air now. We'll certainly see that in the Alonso versus Russell discussion here in a second. So, Verstappen going to be out of the race. And sure, it's more entertaining because you're going to get a new winner, and there were other interesting parts that happened in the Grand Prix, but it's not like the racing was good all of a sudden, and it's not like the issues that these cars generate are suddenly resolved. I still think these regulations have just basically been a disaster, to be honest. So anyway, Perez eventually gets past Alonso. He made a bit of a charge, but Perez lost so much time in his first stint that he never really had a chance here to actually compete. He eventually got past Russell, then he got past Alonso, and during this pass, apparently he picked up some floor damage. We'll discuss that in a second, but he didn't have floor damage before this point, and he was still pretty slow. And the tyre deg was massive. That was the very interesting thing today for Red Bull, is that they had, by the numbers, we'll see the numbers in a second, the worst tyre degradation on the entire grid, when usually they have absolutely the best on the entire grid. So what is going on there? Did Red Bull just mess something up this weekend? I think they must have done. On setup, even on strategy, I don't think they were flawless today with the way they handled Perez. Of course, operationally, their car broke down for Verstappen, it had a failure, so not a good weekend for Red Bull. And Sergio Perez, look, Verstappen's out of the race. That's the opportunity to capitalise. And to be fair, if Verstappen had been out of the race for Jeddah or Bahrain, Perez would have won. He was second that time. But today, the car wasn't as good. Maybe Max could have made the difference there and still won the Grand Prix, even though I do think that is pretty doubtful on the evidence of Perez's race. And even it was noted during practice that the Red Bull had more deg than the Ferrari, quite substantially so. And that was reflected in the Grand Prix. Piastri, and this is the other thing that made the race kind of boring, is that McLaren and Ferrari, they weren't really interested in racing their drivers. They were like, yeah, Piastri, Lano's got newer tyres, let him through type thing. And to be fair, Lano did just charge off into the distance and try and chase down Leclerc. And at the front of the field, it was a pretty similar story. But Sainz was leading the Grand Prix. Leclerc will probably be a bit gutted about this result, really, just because Leclerc's out-qualified and really outperformed Sainz for probably 8 of the last 10 races going back to last year. But on the 2 occasions where Verstappen has a failure or doesn't have a good race, such as in Singapore, Sainz is the one in position to capitalise. So much credit belongs to Sainz for his performance here, the comeback that he's made to even get into this position, of course, to be able to race this weekend after the appendicitis and the appendix surgery and everything like that, getting it removed. I'm sure other drivers are considering whether that weight-saving tactic might be a viable one. Sainz was in position to capitalise. He did exactly that. Leclerc didn't have his best weekends, but still did a stellar drive, and on pure pace was very, very close to Sainz today. They were pretty much neck and neck, the 2 Ferrari drivers, and we'll see what happens, of course, in Suzuka, where that was really when Charles Leclerc's season versus Sainz took a turn last year with the upgrade they brought. But this was the big drama at the end of the Grand Prix, and it's honestly remarkable how often this has happened now. Okay, look, it's only happened twice that Sainz has won a race, Verstappen's had a hard time, and Russell's crashed out on the last lap. But Russell had a good few crashes in 2022 as well, so he was chasing down Alonso for this position. This was actually the only battle on the grid, and going into the final lap, bang, at turn 6, Russell's off into the barriers, And this is the problem, I think, with Turn 6, really, is that the way Turn 6 is designed, Russell then went straight back onto the racetrack. We saw this with Albon last year. He crashed at Turn 6, and the way the barriers are designed, it pretty much reflects the car, deflects the car back onto the track. And this is when drivers get killed, especially in modern Formula 1 and in modern racing, really. The cars are so safe nowadays. You can slam it into a barrier headfirst at 150 miles an hour, and you're probably going to live nowadays, given the incredible safety features of these cars. When the drivers die are when they are hit by another car from the side, or even in this case, potentially from the bottom of the car, right? Because the car flipped up on its side. Pretty crazy instant, actually. Put it up on two wheels because the wheel came off and the suspension obviously failed completely when it hit the wall. So he propped the car up on two wheels. Must have been so scary for Russell in this moment because he knows that there are, 15 Formula 1 cars barreling down behind him, and he was in this position on his side, couldn't really see what was happening to his right, of course, because the car's there. And this is when, if a car plows into Russell here, that's when you get, the Antoine-Hubert type incidents, right? It's not hitting the barriers that's dangerous anymore. It's stuff like this, when you're back on the racing line and you get hit. So this was very concerning, and it's now happened 3 times in the last, 2 years, when a very similar thing to this has happened. And it feels inevitable that at some point there's going to be an incident like that. Hopefully not fatal, obviously, but if they don't change the kind of design of Turn 6 and the way that barrier is set up, I really think they need to adjust that section, because otherwise this is going to probably keep happening, to be honest, because it's a very tricky corner. And Russell was on the radio calling for a red flag. You could really hear the panic in his voice, actually, because he was clearly concerned that someone was going to come around the corner and slam into him. Now, they eventually called, not eventually, but they quickly called the VSC, race control. The question was, should they have called a red flag? Because if they call a red flag here, obviously, in some sense, it's kind of good for Russell because it would go back to the previous laps where he'd get to keep his points. I don't really know if that was on his mind in the moment. I think his mind was really on to staying alive, right? Because, and understandably so. At the same time, would it have made a massive amount of difference? Because under the red flag, the drivers go back to the pit lane at the same speed as they travel under the VSC, I believe. But it's just when it's a red flag called, then the drivers know, okay, let's, race is over, right? There's no racing anymore. Let me just focus on what's in front. Whereas when a VSC's called, it's like, okay, racing's neutralized, but I'm kind of still racing. And thankfully, the engineers were good on the radio to say, hey, especially to Lance Stroll, hey, danger in front, George's in the track and all this, and Lance is able to avoid it. So I don't know if it was a massive problem that race control didn't call a red flag here personally. I think the main thing to think about really is just the design of this particular corner complex. But the main drama was this situation right here. So here's Fernando Alonso going back to the pit and reporting that he's got a throttle problem. His engineer says they can see it and something is failing. Alonso says he thinks it's stuck and needs to press it with the maximum of his strength. Now, this is the debate that people are having, is whether this throttle problem actually existed or not, or whether this was merely Fernando Alonso coming up with a reason to explain the circumstance of this. This is what we see when Russell's coming up behind Fernando Alonso, and as he comes into turn 6, he brakes here. And as he brakes the car, so he slows down the car, he then accelerates the car again, goes throttle into the corner, and then he brakes again for the corner. This then means that Russell closes up dramatically onto Alonso in this corner, and he gets the dirty air, and then off he goes, flying into the barriers. We get the crash, and of course, as we can see here, he comes back onto the racing line, which was very concerning indeed. This is actually the analysis here that AMR Racing puts together, or AM Racing F1 puts together, on the telemetry of the previous laps. So this is lap 54, 55, 56, lap 57 is the white line. So the previous laps, he's doing these numbers into this corner, 276, 276, 280 kph. This lap, he drops down to 243 because he lifts off the throttle completely going into the corner and he brakes going into the corner, and then he brakes again for the corner, which he didn't do on any of the previous laps. So clearly this is a very much an anomaly for Alonso. Why did he do this? Was it because his throttle was failing? Kind of unlikely to me, because why would he brake in that scenario? We don't get to see how much he braked, unfortunately. We don't get that telemetry data. We just get, was the brake on, was the brake off? I think because of, the teams don't want to give away too much data on that type of stuff. I don't really know why. So then people are wondering, did Alonso fake the issues with his car or whatever, as the wily old fox that he is? And we saw this somewhat similar to this with a Mercedes last year when Hamilton was coming up on Alonso into the first kind of complex in Abu Dhabi, and Alonso effectively brake tested Hamilton in some sense to try and let him pass to get the DRS. Hamilton was too smart for that though. He braked himself, he avoided the contact, and then Hamilton was able to get the DRS, I'm guessing, and get the job done here. And there was no penalty for Alonso in this case, pretty much because there was no crash. If there'd have been a crash, would Alonso have been penalised for this? Probably yes. So it's like, if you can get away with it and you think you can get away with it, then why not try it, right? Because Alonso, he knows what he's doing, you know? Like, this guy is probably the smartest driver on the grid. He probably knew that Russell was in a great position to get him on that final lap, so he thought, you know what, if I brake here, if I kind of, slow Russell down through this corner, then I'll give him some more dirty air, and maybe it'll have the result that it did, or it will give Alonso the chance to get away, right? Because he can slow him down a little bit, then he can really put the power on through that corner, get a better exit, and then hold that run the entire way through. So I think Alonso knew what he was doing here. Was it a brake test precisely? Not so sure, but that's pretty much the way the steward saw it. So Russell said after the crash he braked earlier than he had done on previous laps and then got back on the throttle. It was clear that Alonso braked earlier than he had on previous laps. Chauvelin, of course, Andrew Chauvelin said unexpected deceleration in front. So they were pushing for a result here, right? And as Russell says afterwards, totally caught out by the car ahead, doesn't even say Alonso while entering the corner, and obviously he crashed. Look, I don't think it was Alonso's fault that he crashed necessarily. He should have just not crashed the car, I guess. But in Singapore last year, that was definitely his own mistake. On this occasion, there was, I think, some responsibility on Alonso for the way that he dealt with the situation. So the stewards then drop Alonso a 20-second penalty for this. They say, well, basically it's a drive-through, but because you can't serve a drive-through after the race is over, they got a 20-second penalty as a result. So this is what they say. Kind of interesting the way they say it, actually. Should Alonso have the right to try a different approach to the corner? Yes. Should Alonso be responsible for dirty air that ultimately caused the accident? No. However, he did choose to do something with whatever intent that was extraordinary, braking like 100 meters earlier than previously and much greater than was needed to simply slow for the corner. Yes, by the own account of his instant he did, and in the opinion of the stewards, by doing these things, he drove in a manner that was at least potentially dangerous given the high-speed nature of that point of the track. So they're not even saying that it was dangerous, but they are saying that it's potentially dangerous, and therefore, this used to be a 10-second penalty. This is what Verstappen got in Jeddah 2021 for brake testing Hamilton. That was, okay, they're still debating whether it's a brake test or not. I think the team kind of admitted that it was afterwards, to be fair, and he got a 10-second penalty. Nowadays, that would be a drive-through. So that's what they gave Alonso, and therefore he got a 20-second penalty. So this is a matter of a major debate, really, whether this was, fair or not, to be honest, because it was definitely an interesting racing tactic from Alonso. Was it for sure dangerous? I don't know. The stewards describe it as potentially dangerous. Alonso actually said that it's, of course, disappointing and said that it was hard but fair racing. So he doesn't really deny that he was, playing a game, let's say. But he says that should be how it is. That should be part of the sport. And as he goes on to say, that's what any racing driver would do. I didn't feel it was dangerous personally. Now, Mike Crack, the team principal, actually said that there's not much we can do about this. It's surprising to see him drop to P8 with a post-race penalty, but we have to accept the decision. So really intrigued to your thoughts in the comment section below on what you guys think about this, whether Russell is right to kind of, complain in the way that he did. Alonso has actually as well just responded to this on his Instagram, so I thought I'd mention it for you guys here because I thought it was pretty telling, really. Double points for the team at a better race pace in the rest of the weekend. Bit surprised by the penalty at the end of the race regarding how we should approach the corners or how we should drive the race cars. At no point do we want to do anything wrong at these speeds. I believe that without gravel on that corner or any other corner in the world, we would never have even been investigated, right? Which honestly is maybe a fair point. Like, if there was no gravel there, if the corner wasn't designed in the way that it was, and Alonso did this, then sure, Russell runs wide, goes back on the track and nobody cares. But because he crashed, all of a sudden it's a problem. And the stewards did say, oh, well, we don't want to make the decisions based on the outcome, but on the action. But this wouldn't have even been investigated had Russell not crashed, let's be real. An F1 with over 20 years of experience, with epic duels such as Imola 05, 06, Brazil 23, changing racing lines, sacrificing entry speed to have good exits for corners is part of the art of motorsport, as is some of the other tactics maybe that he was employing here. But of course, he's not wrong on this analysis for sure. We never drive at 100% every race lap and every corner. We set fuel, tyres, brakes, so being responsible for not making every lap the same is a bit surprising. We have to accept, and the thing about Japan, to have more pace and fight positions further up the field, and that's pretty much where he leaves it. At the end of the day, it was a double DNF for Mercedes and a 1-2 for Ferrari. And this is, I think, the reason why Hamilton is obviously frustrated about today. But in the back of Hamilton's mind, he's thinking, I've nailed this one, haven't I? Like, I've made a great decision here because he's out of Mercedes, a team that is absolutely falling off the train at the moment. Their cars can't even finish the Grand Prix. Their cars are slow. And then on the other side, Ferrari have scored a 1-2 on the season. Norris picks up the 3rd place. These were the point scorers. Perez was 5th. Alonso drops to 8th in the end. So Stroll was 6th. And Yuki Tsunoda was 7th. What a performance from him. I think Danny Rick was 12th in the end. So, yeah, Yuki to come away with 6 points for that P7 is super impressive. I know that Helmut Marko was gassing him up as well after the race. And double points for Haas. Can you believe it? Like, I would not have said coming into this season with all the negativity around Haas, the fact that they'd apparently built a tractor and all this, that they were going to get double points at Australia. But that's exactly what happens. Now, we've got to say briefly on Perez, right, and look at some of the numbers here, because Christian Horner says that Perez picked up some damage as he was passing Fernando, lost a significant amount of downforce from the floor, so we don't know what a significant amount is. And maybe Perez didn't know this when he said after the Grand Prix that, yeah, Verstappen wouldn't have won either. Absolutely, he wouldn't have won. As a team, we didn't have the pace today. These were the numbers, by the way. So Ferrari were the fastest team. McLaren were not far off at all in the hands of Lando Norris, but also Ferrari were in a very comfortable position, and I'm sure there was a bit of management. Perez, though, was half a second down. So if Perez is half a second down, where would Verstappen have been? And sure, maybe a couple of tenths of that was in the floor damage, but that didn't happen during the first stint. The first stint, Perez was just pretty slow, couldn't get the moves done, and was experiencing major degradation compared to some of the other teams. The Merc was actually not too bad, the Aston was further back, and then we get the other teams, of course, further down the field. But yeah, the Red Bull, the 3rd fastest car in the hands of Perez. Where would Verstappen have been? Does he have half a second Verstappen on Perez? I don't think he's got quite that much. I mean, he might have nearly that much. I think it would have been a battle for the win if Verstappen was there, but I don't think necessarily that he would have won, especially on this evidence. This is tyre degradation data adjusted in seconds per lap for the different compounds. So this is like seconds per lap loss based on tyre deg, and we can see the McLaren and the Aston were apparently the best cars on this. The Red Bull was the worst by actually quite some margin. So I think it was quite clear that they messed up something on the setup this weekend, Red Bull, and I don't know if it would have been enough for Verstappen to win regardless. So I do think this is setting ourselves up for a pretty interesting season. Yes, Verstappen is probably going to win the next 8 races in a row, maybe. But I know that Giuliano De Chessa of Formula Uno said this a few days ago now, that this season feels a bit more like 2022 in the sense that the Red Bull is the faster car and the fastest car overall, but also in the high-speed corners. But the Ferrari can compete, if not be faster than the Red Bull, in some of the slower speeds and in the traction zones, as it was back in 2022. So I think there is a chance this season that we have more races like this, where even if Verstappen doesn't DNF, Ferrari and other teams can be competitive. But have a look at these constructor standings. Mercedes are now behind Aston, and they are the 3rd in the championship Mercedes-powered team. It's just so bad for them right now. And even Hamilton afterwards, he obviously wasn't happy about this. He wanted to finish the race, and he's like, yeah, the engine just seized up. It appeared out of nowhere, a split-second thing. But I think you can kind of tell by his reaction and by the smile on his face that he's like, yeah, okay, unlucky, but you can see in the background the 1-2 for Ferrari. He's, of course, looking forward to next year because he knows this year, like, it ain't going to be a great one. But it's just remarkable, the dichotomy between George DNF, Lewis DNF, and then Ferrari 1 and 2. Worst start to the season he's ever had, says Hamilton. Very tough Grand Prix. Today, of course, not his own fault at all. The car just broke down. Whether Mercedes can make any sort of comeback remains to be seen, but Suzuka on paper should not be a good Grand Prix track for them. So much to discuss over the coming days. Very much intrigued to your thoughts in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new. Take care, and I'll see you next time.